So Preeti, you can start. Unmute yourself and start.
Okay, welcome everyone to a new series that we have started just today onwards. It's called KAOCA Vimarsh. So for the folks who are not from KAOCA, let's just give a one sentence introduction. So KAOCA is the Konkani Association of California. We are a group of about, I would say 750 or 800 families based in the Bay Area, California. After this lockdown has started, we are conducting a lot of online programs because our families are such that we are used to interacting and being together and enjoying all the events together. So now that we have this lockdown in place, my husband Kedar Kodikal and I, we are sort of the presidents of KAOCA this year, we want to. Today, actually, we are starting a new series called KAOCA Vimarsh. And Vimarsh actually just means discussion or interactive discussion. So the point of KAOCA Vimarsh is that, all of us come together and we discuss topics and issues. It may be social topics, it may be health issues, health topics, just any topics that might be of interest to multiple kinds of people, may be different ages or different interests, we want to line up sort of a list of experts who are knowledgeable in that particular area or on that topic, who can enlighten us on that particular topic and tell us more about what it is and what we should know. This is an interactive discussion. It's a Vimarsh. So we request everyone to open up and ask any questions that you may have, and we leave it up to the experts to decide whether you want questions throughout the session, or would you like to present something and wait for questions at the end of the session. You can tell us that when you introduce yourself. So it's totally up to you how you want to conduct it. So today's session is on dementia and Alzheimer's. It's a very, very important topic, and I'm sure it's close to many people's hearts for many different reasons. And we are very thankful to Vidya Nayak, Vidyaka, for recommending an expert in this area, Edie Yau. She's the director in the Alzheimer's Association, so no better person to talk about this topic. We are really blessed to have you in our session, and thank you for coming and sparing the time. Vidyaka, if you don't mind, can you give an introduction tell us something about ED and your involvement in this association? Unmute, Kari.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Preeti. That was a great introduction. So as Preeti said, my name is Vidya Nayak, and I have been a member of KAOCA since its inception in 1985. My child was 1 year old at that time, and KAOCA has been a wonderful social network where we have gotten we have received a lot of support, and it's been just phenomenal. So I'm a volunteer at the Alzheimer's Association since May 2017. I serve on two committees, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee under the leadership of Edie Yau, and the Advocacy Committee, where we reach out to members of Congress and other elected officials to advance the cause of Alzheimer's Association, specifically to ensure funding for research at organizations like the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. I joined Alzheimer's Association as a volunteer after I retired from a pharmaceutical company, where I was senior director of R&D. On a personal note, I've seen the devastation caused by neurological diseases like Parkinson's and its associated dementia. So it really inspires me to want to do something and commit to this cause. So that's why I volunteer at the association. Before I introduce Edie, I'd like to introduce someone else. I'd like to introduce Nancy Westcott. Nancy Westcott worked at a medical device company for more than 30 years. And during her tenure, she held various positions with increasing responsibilities until she retired as Chief Financial Officer. After retirement, Nancy has dedicated her time and energy as a volunteer at the Alzheimer's Association. She joined the board in 2015 and currently serves as the chair of the board for Northern California and Nevada chapter of the association. In the recent past, she also served as the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. She recruited me to volunteer on this committee, and I'm happy she has joined us today. So thank you, Nancy, and welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, today's speaker, Nancy Yau. Nancy is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the Alzheimer's Association, Northern California and Northern Nevada chapter. She provides leadership and strategic direction to diversity and inclusion to advance the organization's vision to create a world without Alzheimer's. In her tenure, she has led innovative programs such as the Asian Dementia Care Network and the San Francisco LGBT Dementia Care Project to raise concern and awareness in diverse communities. She served on the California Task Force on Family Caregiving and currently serves on the California AARP Executive Council. Edie has been in the field of aging for nearly 25 years and has an MA in gerontology. She's our presenter today, and so I'm going to put myself on mute and let Edie do the talking. Thanks, Edie. Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vidya. I can't believe you've been with the association 3 years now. I feel like it was just not too long ago when we first met. Thank you, Preeti, for the introduction, very warm introduction. And thank you all for letting me join your KAOCA Vimarsh. I understand this is the first meeting, so this is very exciting. I do have some slides, but I don't know if you want me to share them or not, or yes? Okay, let me see if I can do that. And I am open to questions during, and my thought, Vidya and I talked that I'm gonna try not to take up the whole time so that we can allow for discussion afterwards too. So either way is fine with me. So let me go ahead and share them. Okay, here we are. And I understand some of you may have already heard a little bit about the association, and a preview may know some more about Alzheimer's from Vidya's talk yesterday. I believe she did talking about overview of some warning signs, so forgive me if there's some overlap. But I just wanted to start with the Alzheimer's Association's vision. We are a national organization. We're the largest organization really that is here to create this movement around defeating Alzheimer's disease. But I love our vision statement, which is a world without Alzheimer's disease and all other dementia. And so I will talk a little bit about what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, because I think that's a common question people have. You know, we're talking about this disease because it is very much impacting not only people in the United States, but globally. And it has not just financial, but emotional impact on the individuals who are affected, but also the families and friends around them. Did you know that 1 in 3 seniors actually die with Alzheimer's or another dementia? And so we're talking about people, you know, over the age of 85. It really is nearly 1 in 3 seniors. It is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And there are more than 5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's. And if we don't do something about this disease, that will grow to 14 million by 2050. And I believe right now, worldwide, there is an estimate that there are 45 million people affected by Alzheimer's. So in India and China and countries all over the world, there are in fact people impacted by this. And then you can see the cost, how if we don't diagnose it early, if we don't develop treatment early, there's a financial toll for families, but also to our federal economic system as well. So let me just go ahead and give you just a quick overview of what dementia is, because this is probably the #1 question we often get. Dementia is a term we use to describe a syndrome. So every time, we see someone who might be forgetful, have difficulty making decisions about their day, having some behavioral challenges, anything that's affecting their ability to function on a day-to-day basis. And those symptoms are categorized as dementia. And then you can see that it's an umbrella term. And so what that means is that just the nice visual, that it really does cover a broad range of these symptoms. Most of the time, the cause of dementia is in fact Alzheimer's. So it is responsible for 60 to 80% of dementia. I like to describe that dementia, when you say someone has dementia, it's almost like saying someone has a high fever. And when someone has a high fever, well, that's a symptom, but high fever in itself is not a disease, that there's something that brings on, that manifests the high fever. It's an indicator that there's something greater wrong. And so these are the different types of dementias or causes of dementia. So there's Alzheimer's, there's also vascular dementia, which is often related to small strokes in the brain. There's Lewy body dementia, there's frontal temporal dementia. And frontal temporal dementia typically affects the frontal temporal lobe, which is more responsible for judgment and executive function. So when people have FTD, we often see people with more judgment issues, behavioral issues, but less of that forgetfulness that we might see with Alzheimer's disease. So they're all a little bit different, which is why it's really important that people do get a diagnosis, or at least see their primary care physician to do a cognitive screening to understand what's causing this dementia. Because what's not listed on here is that 1 in 10 times it is something that is treatable, something that might be reversible. For example, clinical depression may look a lot like dementia, but we know that clinical depression is treatable. And sometimes it can even be urinary tract infection or anemia, that if it goes untreated long enough, it can start to look a lot like dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is in fact a brain disease that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. So again, when you think about the daily functions, from when you got up this morning to remembering to come to today's presentation, today's Vimarsh, there were lots of things that happened along the way. And Alzheimer's really impairs any of those steps. I think this might also be helpful because for some, if you have aging parents, sometimes they worry, oh my gosh, I'm getting forgetful. Do I have Alzheimer's? Or is this just perhaps some normal forgetfulness that might be related to typical aging? And so you can see on the left-hand column there, signs of Alzheimer's and dementia. These are examples. So poor judgment and decision making. We all know that the smoke is, the air quality right now is very poor, and that we probably shouldn't open the windows, and we probably need to stay inside. And someone who may have Alzheimer's, like my father-in-law, if he's not checking on this and he's unaware, or not making those connections, he might go outside and start mowing the lawn or something like that, things like that. Inability to manage a budget. I remember talking to a lady one day where she called and she was concerned about her mom, who she thought, I don't know if she has Alzheimer's or if it's just casual forgetfulness. And she said, and I asked her to describe a little more of what was going on. She said, She had hired a handyman, and she needed to write a check for $100, and she opened up her checkbook and she could not write the check. She could not remember how to write the check. And she said, my mom has always been good at math. So there were lots of things going on here. One, she couldn't seem to manage to figure out the $100, but also that she couldn't seem to write the check. So there were a number of warning signs right there. Because missing a monthly payment, I certainly have missed paying my my utilities bill here and there, and I get a warning and I know, I forgot, I'll pay it now, maybe there's a late fee. But an inability to manage a budget, if someone has typically done that in the past, that would be a warning sign. Similarly, losing track of date or the season, understanding it's nearing fall, nearing the end of summer, getting a sense of what day of the week, although I know when people are retired, that doesn't really matter what day of the week it is. But if you have important appointments that you need to make, you make a point of jotting those down or having a system for remembering those. And people with Alzheimer's, you may tell them today is Sunday, and they may ask again 2 hours later, what day of the week is it? And really not be able to comprehend that. This is the big one, difficulty having a conversation. We often say at the Alzheimer's Association, when you've met one person with Alzheimer's, you've met one person with Alzheimer's. Just by looking at someone, you can never tell. It's only when you start having an in-depth conversation that you start to notice there's something not right here. Because some people are very good at still carrying on a quick, casual conversation. Hi, how are you? How's your day? How's the family? And they may be able to give, pretty standard answers. But it's when you ask, so what did you do over the weekend? Oh, when is your daughter coming home from college? And you start to have that in-depth conversation, and you start to notice there's some significant gaps. And when we're talking about misplacing things and being unable to retrace steps, this is the key. So this is the one that I think people often worry about. I know this person, I can't remember that person's name, but I know them. Does that mean I have Alzheimer's? Or I've misplaced something, does that mean I have Alzheimer's? If you can retrace your steps, is that then you're okay? So for example, if you lost your car keys and you're home and you just came home from the grocery store, if you can retrace your steps, where did I go when I came out of the car and then put the groceries away and all of those steps in between, and you can retrace your steps, and eventually you'll find them. You'll know I put them, they have to be somewhere in the house, between the car and the house. You can do that. But someone with Alzheimer's, you can give them the car keys maybe a few hours later, and they won't remember, one, that they lost them, or they might not remember what they're for. And so there's a real difference there. So if you're just losing things from time to time, again, if you can retrace your steps, or you remember that person's name 3 days later, or maybe in the middle of the night at 3 in the morning, that's Preeti, that's her name, then you're fine. But if I had to tell you, oh, her name is Preeti, and you said, who's that? Like you don't even remember that you were trying to remember that person's name, or that it has no relevance, that's the concern. So I hope that helps differentiate casual forgetfulness that we might have in this fog of living at work or being at home all the time, that these things do happen. But I do want to share some highlights from our Alzheimer's Association International Conference. And this was something that we're really proud of, where we highlight studies, findings, discoveries from researchers from around the world. And this is a conference that we would typically have in person. It was supposed to be in Amsterdam in July, and we ended up doing it virtually, and we had 33,000 people attend. We'll probably do it again virtually, I'm guessing, next year, and you're all welcome to attend. But there were some key takeaways that I wanted to share with you from this conference. And here they are. And so one of them was, because if you don't already know this, right now we know that Alzheimer's is a fatal disease and there is no cure. There's not really an effective treatment. There are medications available that may help with symptoms, and it may keep people where they are in that course of the disease a little bit longer than at a slower decline, if you will. And we know of some lifestyle factors that are important, but no effective treatment that will actually stop the disease, and no effective treatment or cure, excuse me. So a lot of the research that is looked on is either around prevention, diagnosis, treatment, or cure, or also ways to improve quality of life. And that's for caregivers and for the person with Alzheimer's. So it may be related to symptoms or other things. So that's kind of the range. We're looking at research from the whole spectrum around Alzheimer's and other dementia. But one of the things that was a highlight was around vaccines, because vaccines, if you've not heard, is a very big topic right now. And so while we're hoping that there's a COVID vaccine, we certainly are looking at whether there's an Alzheimer's vaccine. But one of the things that came out of this conference was looking at flu vaccination. And we are right around the corner from flu season, and flu vaccinations are in fact available right now. But one study found at least one flu vaccination in your lifetime it has an association of 17% reduction in Alzheimer's incidence. 17% reduction in Alzheimer's incidence. And the more frequent people are getting flu vaccination, there's an association of an additional 13% reduction. I have to tell you, I do not typically get a flu vaccination. I have my kids get them, and my husband gets it because he's a teacher, and I always say, I'm fine, I don't need it. But I am going to get one this year because there's this added benefit to it. And we don't know exactly what that relationship is. Maybe in part it's because people who do get the flu vaccine also take better care of their health, who knows? But in either way, you know, the flu vaccine is very important this year for multiple reasons. So I hope that encourages you to look at that. But the other vaccine also was looked at, vaccination against pneumonia. And people, older adults, are at greater risk of developing pneumonia. And if they do, it's also much more serious. And so one study found that a vaccination against pneumonia between ages of 65 and 75 reduced Alzheimer's risk by up to 40%, 40%, depending on the person's overall health and genes. But that's pretty encouraging as well. And then a third study found that people with dementia have a significantly higher risk of dying after viral, bacterial, and other infections than those without dementia. So again, it's pretty critical to be thinking about if there are vaccinations in this whole conversation, whether people should get vaccinations or not. This is something to add to that conversation. So the next one is a blood test for Alzheimer's on the horizon. Hopefully all of you go to have a regular physical, if not yearly, on a regular basis. And usually when you have a regular annual checkup or something, they usually do some blood tests for, what do you know what they take blood tests for? Anyone? What are they testing for? Maybe diabetes? What else?
About the vitamin D deficiency, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Thyroid.
Thyroid? Yep.
Lipids, cholesterol.
Yes. And so cholesterol. So let's talk about that. So getting a blood test for cholesterol helps indicate whether someone has high cholesterol, regular, low cholesterol, and that's a biomarker to indicate if someone has heart disease. And because we're able to test for cholesterol, you don't have to necessarily wait for a heart attack to happen to know you have heart disease. So it's a great way to indicate there's something not right here, and then you can reduce your risk of preventing a heart attack, right? We don't have that for Alzheimer's yet, but this is showing some promise that there are scientists who are really starting to develop better tests to detect Alzheimer's. Right now, the ways that are being explored are PET scan, which is a brain scan, right? Or testing your cerebral spinal fluid, which is not all that convenient. And so there are so many reasons why this is very exciting, to be able to have a blood test that you may eventually be able to have done at your doctor's office at a low cost that would be accessible to so many people. And so that's really the hope. So keep looking for that.
Edie, do you
yeah.
know what biomarker they're looking at for the blood test?
Yes, so I was just going to say, so it's for beta amyloid, which is the protein, right, that is the hallmark associated with Alzheimer's. So many of the studies have been looking at beta amyloid and also tau, and so we've seen some blood biomarkers for beta amyloid, but actually the most recent one that they've highlighted, and so let me correct myself, at this AAIC conference, the most recent blood biomarker that they're highlighting is actually a tau biomarker, p-tau 217. So for any of you scientists out there, that's the specific blood test that they really featured at this study. So, and levels of tau may be the most accurate way of, a definitive way of diagnosing someone with Alzheimer's. So this is truly exciting. So let me go on, and then if you have other questions about that, we can have a discussion. Early life risk factors matter. So we do know there are some lifestyle factors that impact one's risk of getting Alzheimer's. That's diabetes, high blood pressure, or 2 or more heart health risk factors. But what was discovered or shared at this conference was that even in early life, even in adolescent years, when people have these risk factors, it may impact and increase their risk of getting Alzheimer's later. And so it really points to the importance of early education and healthy diet. All of these things are incredibly important at a young age even. So while we're saying, you know, you can still start, it's not too late to start some of these things when you're 50 or 60, it actually is really critical if you can start that earlier. Healthy diet and all of those factors, exercise, and maintaining a good education. The other one that study that was highlighted was that it was how Alzheimer's affects Latino populations. And this was really, I think this is really highlighting the importance of diversity among participants in clinical trials. What we learn about any possible treatment, prevention or cure depends on who's actually in these studies. And one of the things that was learned in studying Latinos specifically is that we know, in fact, that Latinos are 1.5 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's than their non-Hispanic white counterparts. But one of the things that was really unearthed here was around the Apoe4 gene. So we all have copies of Apoe4. We have, or Apoe, and we all have 2 copies. So they might be Apoe2 and Apoe3, or Apoe4 and 4, or 1 and 4, different combinations. And when people have 1 copy of Apoe4, they might have a greater, it's a risk gene. It's not a deterministic gene. That's really important to share. But we've often said, if someone has 2 copies of Apoe4, they are at greater risk of developing Alzheimer's. Well, that's actually not true for Latinos. And we've learned this actually in recent years. This is also not true of African Americans. That Apoe4 is not necessarily as much of a risk factor for African Americans. And now we're learning it's also not as a major player necessarily with Latinos. What about South Asians, Asian Americans? We don't know that yet. So here's where I would say how important it is that we all are participating in research where we can. And so then the question is Apoe4, it's a risk gene. I know this question came up yesterday. Should I get genetic testing to see if I have this gene? And it's a much more complicated response to that because 1, we don't have a cure or effective treatment yet. And so what would you do with that information? So oftentimes people are in fact dissuaded from getting tested. It's not that easy to get that, although there are these online places where they might test for it, but you really need to be careful and I would encourage you to get genetic counseling before you get tested for it. The things we do know about it, if the answer is, well, I might change my lifestyle if I knew I had this risk gene. Well, there are things we know: eating healthier, exercising more, keeping your mind engaged, staying socially stimulated. Those are all important ways to reduce your risk. There's no reason why we shouldn't do that now, whether we know if we have Apoe4 or not. And then the other piece of that is just there are people who don't have Apoe4 gene that may get Alzheimer's, and there are people who have Apoe4 risk gene and may never get it, right? Again, it's a risk gene, not a deterministic gene. So it's just something to think about there. The last thing I'll share and then is that we are, in fact, Alzheimer's Association is in fact conducting a new research study to globally track and understand the long-term impact of COVID-19 and the brain, especially around cognition, behavior, and function. And so there's more to learn about that, but we're pretty excited about it. And this is working alongside with the World Health Organization. And, this COVID has certainly been a major concern in long-term care settings for individuals who live in those settings and also for their family members, not being able to communicate with them. So there's definitely some awareness around that. Really, let me just stop there actually and see if you have, and open it up, see if you have any questions.
So if anyone has questions, can I just request you to unmute yourself and be free to ask anything?
Edie, I have a question.
Yes.
Will you be going over what the association spends its money on? What kind of research? Is it for diagnosis or treatment or, providing help for caregivers, etc.?
Sure, I can certainly do that. Let me, if you want more, I don't have it, I can't say that I have it divided up in terms of percentage, but as I mentioned earlier, we really cover the whole spectrum. And so the Alzheimer's Association, we are a nonprofit organization, volunteer-led and driven, and 90% of our funding comes from individual donations. Very little of our funding comes from federal dollars. And in terms of research, it really is around prevention, but also the diagnostic process, brain imaging, understanding how to actually diagnose it better, but also fine-tuning the types of tools that are used to diagnose, and then around treatment as well, and also cure. But certainly also we've had a number of studies look at caregiving issues too. So the process is really, it's a global it's a global group of medical scientific team that vet these studies. So it's not me, it's not our executive director in our Northern California office that determines these. It's really from our national medical scientific team that have scientists from across the world that vet what studies ought to get funded. We typically fund studies that have promise that perhaps NIH hasn't looked at. And so we're looking at innovative studies. And we also are doing quite a bit to encourage young scientists. And that's one of the exciting things we've seen here. We're lucky to be in California where we have 10 research institutions that really do a good job around Alzheimer's disease, and they've received quite a bit of funding from grants from the association. And many of them are young scientists. In fact, one of them is one from Stanford who really looked at disparities, health disparities. And that's really an important piece. So young scientists that typically may get overlooked at NIH because NIH may fund something that's bigger and has a perhaps a more guarantee that might last. But we're very good at funding some innovative studies. Or what we've also done is fund studies where the funding at NIH may have ended, but we see there's promise if they could continue, and we may pick it up from there. I don't know if that answers your question, but we cover the whole spectrum.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Edie, I have two questions.
Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes.
The first one. The first one is there any research done to find out any correlation between Alzheimer's and the type of food you eat? Specifically those who eat a lot of meat versus vegetarians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. So around diet, I don't think, so yes and no, in that there have been studies looking at diet, and where we've landed is that we know the Mediterranean diet is a good model to follow. So that pyramid that you may have seen in grocery stores or in health literature, you want to balance your diet with a lot of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes. and very little saturated fat, in particular red meat and other types of animal fat. Having said that, there is no study per se that can say, well, these people who ate lots of meat did this and these people who didn't eat any. But one of the studies that we have happening right now in the United States is the finger study, the pointer study, which is the finger study was the study done in Finland. And what that study showed is they looked at people, particularly in the older years, late 60s, early 70s. These are people who and what they found was that when they improved their diet, exercised, did a lot of aerobic exercise, and they, did all of those lifestyle factors that we know are important. And then they would give them cognitive tests. And over a couple years, they showed significant improvement. Now, the issue with that is that in Finland, it's a pretty homogeneous population. Everyone eats pretty much the same type of food, same environment. And so the United States, we have the pointer study, which is looking at those lifestyle factors, but we're really looking at diverse population. So that's exciting because then we're going to start to see, does this in fact help us and it's also, this study is also being done in other countries, Singapore, I believe India as well, a Latin American country, just really globally, everyone is looking at this.
The second question I have, is there any research done on to find out the correlation between meditation and reduction in Alzheimer's?
You mean taking medication, any kind of medication altogether?
No, not medication, meditation.
Oh, meditation, yes, so, sorry, meditation. I don't know specific studies, but I have heard it mentioned. I think there are researchers looking at that and exploring it. I know that there's been interest in helping individuals who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's or related dementia, that this can help. I know that meditation has been studied as a way to reduce caregiver stress. And so there have been studies looking at ways to reduce caregiver stress, and mindfulness techniques and meditation have been incorporated in those interventions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi,
Any-
Edie.
Yeah.
Hi, Edie.
Hi.
Yeah, I had a similar question to Ravi, but you've answered that. Another question I had was regarding the symptoms. For example, you have the different one, age-related versus Alzheimer's and dementia, poor judgment. And so what if somebody starts forgetting if they've eaten breakfast or things like that? Is it the onset of Alzheimer's, or is it dementia that's developing into Alzheimer's, or how is that? Because how do you know at which stage that person is in his Alzheimer's? Or I don't know if you're getting the question I'm trying to ask.
I do. I understand. Yeah. I think the progression is from normal cognition to mild cognitive impairment to having dementia symptoms, and within Alzheimer's we often describe it as 3 stages: early, middle, and late stage. And so I think when someone is starting to show those signs of early forgetfulness, if it is in fact Alzheimer's, then they are definitely showing dementia symptoms.
Okay.
Because there are people who may have Alzheimer's and not have
Dementia.
symptoms. Yeah, they may not show the dementia symptoms. If
Yeah.
that were the case, Alzheimer's would not be a problem. I wouldn't care if I had Alzheimer's if I never developed the symptoms. But in all likelihood, if anything, we've learned that people who have Alzheimer's, by the time they are diagnosed and they are symptomatic, they have in fact have had Alzheimer's for maybe at least 10 years before that. Before that. So once you see someone who's symptomatic, it's really important to go see the doctor and really give that doctor the full picture. Describe specific episodes that are happening that make you concerned. Like she couldn't write a check. She forgot, you know, she was going to my retirement party and we did her hair and then she washed it right after. You know, those specific examples help the doctor understand what's going on, because if it's a short visit, the person may present very well. How are you? I'm fine. And they look wonderful. But the doctor doesn't know, oh, she got lost in her own neighborhood twice, or there are all these nicks and dings on her car and we don't know where that came from. Those things really help.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, I have a question. I have a question. My name is Amita, Eddie, and kind of it's partly related to the same question Veena had or something similar, but it's an actual exact example. My dad had what we called dementia, but right now I don't know, whether it was Alzheimer's or dementia, and he got it around when he was in his early 80s and he passed away at 91. And ever since he went on Aricept, it was arrested for quite a bit, but I mean, I would think the symptoms did increase a little bit, but nothing drastic. He couldn't remember things. He kept asking the same question, but it never came to a point where he forgot us or didn't recognize us. He didn't recognize others who he knew from the past and all that. But then on the flip side, I have another aunt who's actually was my father's cousin, who literally developed it overnight. I mean, one day she had minor forgetfulness and then pretty much overnight, she forgot everything. She was remembering, she kept thinking that she's with her parents and her aunts and stuff who passed away at least 40, 50 years ago. And from then on, it was completely full blown. She couldn't recognize almost nobody in the family either. So what's that difference? Why would it have come on? And I can kind of understand based on what you're saying, it actually makes more sense to me. But if you could, using these examples, maybe give us a little clearer picture of what the difference is between these two. Because I mean, it happened with, they both have so the relationship is that both of them, their parents were siblings.
Yeah, so typically, one, you mentioned Aricept, and for those who may not be familiar with Aricept, it is an Alzheimer's prescribed medication, and it does exactly what Amita said, which is that it kind of halted that decline for a while, and it keeps that person where they are longer. So that's a good thing. It doesn't mean that they're not the brain cells are not dying, it's just that at maybe a slower rate. It's very unusual, and typically Alzheimer's does not happen overnight. We often describe it as it's so gradual that families may not recognize it until later, and then they realize, oh, you know what, this has been going on for months or years. So it may be something else that was happening with your aunt, where it happened overnight that she was suddenly not recognizing people. I'm not saying it can't be dementia, but in all likelihood, it might not be Alzheimer's, or sometimes what we see is if someone has a spouse that might be compensating for their everyday forgetfulness, oh, well, I'll do the cooking or I'll do the shopping because you seem to be a little forgetful. And then if that person suddenly dies, all of a sudden, not just is it more noticeable to everyone else around that person, but they don't have that coping, that someone to compensate for those losses, and the overwhelming grief that might suddenly manifest even more symptoms. So there might be other things that were going on with her that caused this sudden night and day appearance. But again, I'm not a doctor, so I wouldn't be able to diagnose it, but it's unusual for that to happen.
And just to give context, she did have minor forgetfulness before, but this happened when she was around in her 90s or 90 or 91, or maybe even 89 and 90. So, and she lived up to 96 and my dad lived up to 91. So,
wow.
Yeah. Thank
The
you.
other thing I'll mention that you brought up, that their parents were siblings. So often people wonder, is this hereditary?
Right.
And so in most cases, Alzheimer's, it's an isolated case. Age is the greatest risk factor, and we don't know enough about all of the genes that might have some link to Alzheimer's, but those who have, in fact, that deterministic gene for Alzheimer's, they would typically get it at a much younger age, from their 30s to their early 50s. So when you have someone who gets it in their 80s, age is probably the greatest risk factor, and we don't know what caused it specifically.
Because for us, we kind of are worried all the time because it's there's 3 in the family. All of them got it at after early 80s to mid 80s, and the aunt who got it really severe was the severity happened in her either 89 or 90. I can't remember. So thank God, that's good to know. At least it's not.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
But having said that, I mean, certainly if I have it in my family, if my grandmother had Alzheimer's or my mother gets Alzheimer's, I will be at greater risk, just because similar to breast cancer or other diseases, but it's not necessarily deterministic that we know of.
Yeah, we're all of us are aware of that. So yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Eddie. This is Vivek. I really want to thank you for a very well presented Vimarsh here. So I have a couple questions related to lifestyle and what research data you are familiar with. So how about any research studies related to loneliness versus family and social interaction? So has there been any documentation about what's the rate of diagnosis in people who live alone after age 60, either because of divorce or death or whatever that is happening, and then people who live in either community homes or live with small or large families? That's one. Second is any research about sleep cycles, whether people who go to bed after midnight with their sleep cycle, what happens, and people who go to bed, say, before 10 o'clock. And a lot of talk was done in the past about use of brain exercises like Sudoku or crossword or playing cards, any role of those. So would appreciate your comments on that.
Yes, those are excellent questions because I didn't cover those as much, but loneliness, that's an important one. And that is what, so one of the lifestyle factors is about social engagement, and why that's so important is because there have been studies that show when people, a particular study I know of was people who self-identified as being lonely. And that's different from the fact that I live alone. These are people who could have multiple family members around, or they could be married, but they still identify as lonely. And there are people who live alone who may not feel that way. So loneliness is in fact a risk factor. And I do often worry about people who live alone, who are older, and you know, if they don't ever see anyone or talk to anyone, that's a concern. It might, we don't know enough about this, but if I could speculate, when you think about why social engagement is so important, and especially now under COVID circumstances, even these Zoom meetings are helpful because it helps us with those social interactions. We behave a certain way when we're with other people than our spouse or with our children sometimes, you know certain social etiquettes, and you know it's practicing these social engagements, and you may have different kinds of conversations, and it stimulates your brain, right? And so you need to find ways to stimulate your brain in all different kinds of facets. So let me just jump to the brain exercises, because they're somewhat, I think it's a nice segue. When we're talking about mental stimulation, we're not talking about people someone who's good at crossword puzzles to keep doing more of that. We're talking about you want to build new connections in your brain. So you have billions of neurons in your brain, and at any age they've discovered you can still build connections. So at 65, at 75, you can still build new connections. And that happens when you really have to make your brain sweat. Like doing Sudoku would make my brain sweat, because that would challenge my brain. Or learn a new instrument or a new language, or plan a vacation for next year, doing something that stimulates your brain in a different way than you're normally used to using it. Now, sleep is another really important factor. And I think we're learning a lot more about sleep that's so interesting. I remember hearing a researcher, I think maybe it was on NPR or something, he's a sleep scientist, but he said that human beings are the only creatures that really fight that need for the need for sleep. That we seem to almost boast like, I don't need that much sleep, you know what I mean? But human beings, in fact, do need sleep, and our brains need sleep. And so around Alzheimer's disease, it's scientists have determined we do need 6 to 8 hours of sleep, and preferably consecutive hours. Because what happens, there's something that happens in our brain when we're asleep that doesn't happen when we're awake, which is, so we know the beta amyloid plaque that is associated with Alzheimer's, we all have some of it, but people with Alzheimer's have an excess amount of this beta amyloid plaque. And so the brain needs to clear some of this out, is one theory. And so what the brain does when we're asleep is it's acting like a dishwasher. It clears out the waste in our brain. It cannot do that when we're awake, because our brains are active doing so many things. It's only when we're asleep. So one of the challenges I think that researchers are wrestling with is sleep an indicator of Alzheimer's, or do people with Alzheimer's then have poor sleep? It's kind of both is what we're seeing, that you do need to get on a regular basis adequate sleep. And so there's a lot we have on our website around sleep hygiene, you know, practicing good sleep hygiene, getting yourself prepared to be tired and go to bed and all of that. But we also do notice that people with Alzheimer's, they have more interrupted sleep. And we don't know if that's because of the Alzheimer's or something else going on. So that is important. Now, there's nothing I've seen that, oh, you have to go to bed by 10 p.m. I think there are people who are night owls, if you will, and if they go to bed at, say, 1 in the morning, but they're still able to get the 6 to 8 hours of sleep, that might be fine.
So you're saying circadian rhythm has got no significant role based on your data?
Not that I am aware of, but I know that there are a number of scientists that are still looking at sleep. And then I've seen that melatonin may not be all that helpful. So I know sometimes people say, oh, I should take melatonin to help me. It may not be as helpful as we thought. But for sure, those sleep medications like Ambien are really not encouraged, and especially for people with Alzheimer's, it's very much discouraged to have them take that, because it it only impairs their cognition even more. They're much more confused the next day or in multiple days.
Continuing from your reference to melatonin, have you come across any other studies about any other vitamins or nutrients or botanical or herbal medicines that you are aware of, or that your institution recommends?
I think we've seen a lot of interesting studies on various herbs, supplements, nutritional supplements, even coffee, and wine. And wine, in fact, has shown to be good for you, but in moderation, right? Like 1 glass a night with dinner, that kind of thing. Turmeric has also been studied. Coconut oil has been studied. The thing to remember about all of these studies is that they are small studies and they are a smaller sample. And so when there's promise in any of these studies, what the Alzheimer's Association recommends is, we can't really comment on their effectiveness until we see that next level of a trial, right, to a larger sample of 1,000 people or more. And so that's where I think then is the challenge, is we see coconut oil showing some improvement, but then it wasn't shown to be beneficial, or they haven't done the study yet for a larger sample. So while some of these things are harmless, people use coconut oil in cooking on a regular basis, we can't recommend people ingest certain numbers of tablespoons of it until we see those studies. So that's what I caution you to think about whenever you read any studies that show promise, like, oh, it's cured Alzheimer's or it improved their person's memory, but how many people were in that study?
Thank you, Eddie, and for a wonderful presentation again. And I thank Preeti and Kedar for conducting the Zoom sessions to reduce our risks of dementia and Alzheimer's by keeping us socially connected. Thank you.
Well said.
Edie, I have one more question, sorry.
Yes.
I believe you said there are 5 million people in this country. So since this is an election year, how do they plan to vote?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know if someone with Alzheimer's, depending on how far along they are in their disease, if they're able to vote or not, right? Yeah, that's up to the family
Are they allowed to get help legally? Someone else can help them to select the candidate?
That's a very interesting question. I'm thinking about my own father-in-law, and I'm guessing he's still in the, he's more towards the middle stage now, but maybe still he's categorized as early by his doctor. And I know that he and my mother-in-law will have conversations, but she also knows his political persuasion from before Alzheimer's, and still pretty consistent. So, but that's an interesting question. I haven't seen any laws necessarily that say if you have Alzheimer's, you're not allowed to vote. Where driving, if you do receive a diagnosis of some cognitive impairment, it doesn't even have to be Alzheimer's, cognitive impairment. In California, the DMV, the doctor does need to notify the DMV. And that actually is helpful for families, and also probably a good thing for society. We really need to be careful about having people with Alzheimer's driving when you think about, the reaction time and your ability to understand what's going on around you in seconds. And that can be very detrimental. But so, Ravi, I think you brought up something that would be a much longer debate and conversation for another time.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Aparna. Do we have time for a quick question or?
Definitely, Aparna.
So going back on what Amita said about someone who had rapid onset dementia, a close friend of mine, her mom had this where she went from being mildly forgetful to really not knowing where the bathroom was in a matter of 4 weeks, and now she doesn't recognize anyone. But they did have, she did have mild clinical depression from before that. So is there any correlation? You said that symptoms can show up as Alzheimer's when you have depression, but does it work the other way around? So if you're depressed, can it lead, are you at a higher risk to have this?
Yes. Yes, depression can certainly be a risk factor for Alzheimer's. And I think what we're seeing in our COVID environment right now is people may be developing depression. They may be more isolated. Their social activities have been halted, which can make things worse. With the smoke, if they're not able to exercise, go for walks outside, you might start to see people's symptoms. You know, they have more bad days, but hopefully that can improve once we can introduce some more of these activities in their lives.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I want to share this slide, just our helpline, to make sure everyone knows that the Alzheimer's Association, we offer a free 24-hour, 7-day-a-week helpline at 800-272-3900, and our website that has a ton of information. But our helpline, you can call at 3 in the morning, on New Year's Day, anytime. And if you have specific questions and you're just not sure, you can always call them and you'll get professional help and guidance. So please make use of this and share it with other people too, because that's what we're here for.
Edie, I have a question.
Yes.
In the same vein as the election, you know, about the process of when you're competent to do certain things, such as, say, advance directives, legally, can you change your will, you know, your will, or do an advance directive when you're in the middle? You know, what stage would it be acceptable, do you think, to be mentally competent?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So this is one of the reasons why it's so important that people get diagnosed as early as possible. So anytime you see symptoms, to get them to the doctor, because to make changes to your will or to do anything to your trust, any estate planning, they will look at whether you have cognitive capacity to make these decisions. And so you always want to do that even before you're noticing, right? All of us should already have a will planned out, an advance directive for health and for finance, because once someone's in the middle stage, they're likely not given permission to make those changes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Edie, if you don't mind my asking a question. So if you have a relative who's going through dementia or Alzheimer's, you know, how do you take care of them in a way that maintain their self-esteem and, you know, sense of self, and, you know, just being sensitive to their new state of being? So
yeah, that's a great question, Preeti. I think you have to, with love and dignity, you know, even though towards later stages, or even in the middle stage, or even in the beginning stage, there are many things that the person may not be able to do, but to treat them with dignity, you know, they may want to continue to do those things themselves, and they're having a conversation, and it's much slower for them to get their thoughts out, rather than jumping in and filling in the words for them. just, you gotta let them take their time, and ask if they want some help, or maybe, oh, is it Togos you're thinking of, or oh, what are those flowers? And wait, oh, are they sunflowers? But with dignity, with respect, and with love, to enter their world. So if they insist today is Wednesday and you have nowhere to go, it really doesn't make a difference. Ask yourself, what does it matter, right? You have to pick your battles, but enter their world and understand that it's quite frustrating for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Edie, I have one question. The Alzheimer's Association spends all your resources on the Alzheimer's only, or do you work on the other forms of dementia you discussed earlier?
Yeah, so I think we really look at it in the broadest way. So certainly some of the research that's funded, maybe looking at some other types of dementia or dementia in a broader sense. Some of the studies we fund are really around a healthy brain, even before someone develops dementia, to look at these comparisons and understanding brain health. And then care consultation, the care and support that we provide through the 24/7 helpline and all of those services helping families. It doesn't matter to us if it's Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or some other dementia. So we really treat them all under the same care. But because Alzheimer's is by far the most common cause of dementia, that's where a lot of our focus is. But certainly we help people with other dementias.
Hey, Edie, this is Vidya. Very quickly, the clinical trials and what is funded, that's available on the website, right? And if you want to participate in the clinical trial, there's a trial match. Yeah, exactly. So I was hoping you mentioned that.
She wants to make sure we cover this. So if any of you are interested in even exploring, well, what studies are near me that I might be eligible for, you can simply go to this website, alz.org/trial match. It's just been redone, and it's much easier to use because now you can just go in, type in your zip code, some basic information, how far you're willing to travel, and the studies immediately pop up of which ones you're eligible for or that are near you. And so that might be interesting for you all to see. And then it's up to you to, if you want to contact them and see if they are still accepting any participants or not. But it's really important for all of us to get more involved because we need to see more Asians in research. The only other thing I wanted to share, I need to let you know about our Walk to End Alzheimer's. This is our signature event that happens every year, and it is happening now. Walk is everywhere. We're encouraging people to form teams. You're going to walk in your own neighborhood. We don't have a designated location this year, but this is so important to raise that public awareness about Alzheimer's, to reduce that stigma around Alzheimer's and dementia. And certainly it helps raise funds for our cause. We fund research, the care and support that people can get now, and so many other things that we do. So you can look it up here. And I think that was really it. So Preeti, thanks again for having me. And if anyone has any additional questions, I'm happy to share my email address and people can email me, or they can, better yet, call our 800 number, but check out our website as well.
Thank you so much, Edie, and thank you so much, Vidyaka, and thank you so much, Nancy, for being there as well. Thank you for taking the time to, patiently answer all our questions. As you saw, this is a very important topic for so many. And even after this session, there'll be a lot of questions in our minds. So thank you, Edie, for opening up, different channels for us to contact you in case we have questions. And it's so wonderful to have such an organization. it's good to recognize that there's such an issue, because sometimes families may be in denial or people may be in denial. So thank you for, so we can look out for signs in friends, relatives, and, help people we love. So with that, we end this at KAOCA Vimarsh today. And a couple of weeks later, so actually exactly 2 weeks later, we have another session planned with, I'm trying to look for her window if I still see her. There she is, Akshata. Do you see her waving? Akshata Nayak. She's going to talk about stress management. Correct, Akshata? About how to deal with stress using, by improving your diet and your lifestyle. So that's another interesting topic we'll be looking forward to. So
Thank you.
So when we initially thought about KAOCA Vimarsh, we thought about having a frequency of about once a month, but then we got a lot of interesting topics and we thought let's make it once every 2 weeks. So suppose we end up having more topics, we might make it every week. So if you think of any topics that might be interesting to you and to most KAOCans and everyone, please feel free to suggest, or if you know of experts who like Edie and Nancy, who can help enlighten us and answer questions, we'll really appreciate it. So thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take
you.
care.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you, Preeti and Kedar. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.